Well, good morning. Thanks to all of you for being here. I know it's a busy day with lots of initiative in the city, so the fact that you are here is quite appreciated. And of course, thanks to the guests to have done quite long trips to be here and talk about research integrity. I say in the beginning that I'm very sorry I will not be able to attend the whole conference because there is another meeting in Rovereto where I have to go. And the reason for which I'm so sorry is not only that it's always bad to go away after bringing greetings, but also the fact that I acknowledge that I don't know as much as I should about research integrity. So I was looking forward to this occasion to learn. And I think this is something that all researchers across Europe more or less are facing. At least that's my impression. Because from one side, the principles of research integrity seems to be obvious. To be honest, responsible, reliable, to respect the colleagues are all stuff that not only we expect from others, but we also aspire to respect in our doings. So from one side, it seems obvious. From the other side, it's the importance of research integrity and the role that it's going to play in the future is still highly underestimated in my view. Because as I see it, research integrity is just the other side of our quest for autonomy and independence as researcher. We know that any attempt to regulate research from the outside is pretty dangerous in our view, and usually it's also pretty ineffective. So we need to find ways to guarantee from inside the research process that the quality and respect that we all strive to endorse are really endorsed in our process. We need transparent ethical standards for the research work that can be established and monitored within our own communities. And this is important because if we claim that research is important for society, then of course society has the right to ask if they are receiving the right research. And if there are good norms and procedures to ensure its integrity. The fact is we cannot take anymore the trust of the public in science for granted. It's a worrying trend, but it's there. And a better reflection on research integrity may help us to restore credibility in science and moving towards better time. Of course, to define these standards is not easy. The design of correct procedure to ensure research integrity is still something we haven't worked out. And in Trento particularly, we acknowledge that we need a lot of work to simplify the procedure already in place and to make it systematic rather than occasional. So we have lots of work to do, and I guess this conference is part of the starting this process. Now, how would I like to set research integrity for this university, but hopefully for also in general, being the vice rector for research? Well, what really scares me is that when I talk with researchers in this university about research integrity, I feel more fear than pleasure in a way. I don't know if it's the same, but I'm afraid it's the same in other universities. Many researchers fear that whatever we do in this field will turn out to be more bureaucratic hassles, more questionnaires, more committees to deal with, to abstract chartering and whatever. And as example, young researcher, which I didn't expect, fears that research integrity may become another tool in the hand of senior researchers to somewhat keep control of their work or keep control of the way research should be done and whatever. Now, this is not what research integrity is, and I think it's not what research integrity should be in Trento. This fear needs to be addressed providing alternatives. And I think the alternative is making research integrity an integral dimension of research, which means a condition for better and more effective research, not a hassle for those who want to do research, which means making research integrity not a burden, but an opportunity. Of course, how to do so is not easy. We know that there are 2 projects financed by the EU in this university on this, which we hope will provide quite important information. And of course, there is Integra, the initiative that not by chance the strategic plan of the university has adopted, and this conference is part of it. So I hope that today we start together a process in which we get some good ideas on how to make research integrity work and work for research. And in this, of course, I wish to thank Casonato, Picciocchi, and all the research staff of the university for having organized it.
Okay, Giuseppe, thank you very much for this introduction. I think that you already sum up a little bit a list of issues we're going to deepen in this meeting today. Because when it comes to research integrity, there are many definitions, many different ideas on contents, on actors, on standards, on principles, on research integrity. As a matter of fact, research integrity is a very complex, multifaceted concept. And the University of Trento, also with this meeting, this is kind of kick-off meeting, so we would like to make this meeting a kind of first step in order to go deeper and deeper into the research integrity. Yesterday we already had a very interesting meeting with the PhD students on research integrity, and today we would like to go deeper into the issue, and we would like to address the issues and the different sides and dimensions of research integrity by focusing on three perspectives. The first one is the European perspective. The second one is the national perspective and the role of an ethics committee. And the third one, the third dimension, will be the University of Trento perspective. So what the law, from a kind of local perspective, from the global European to the local. Regarding the first perspective, the European level, we have the privilege of having here with us Krista Varantola. Krista is Chancellor Emerita, and you are going to explain us the meaning of this qualification. It's Chancellor Emerita of the University of Tampere in Finland. She's former chair of the Finnish National Board on Research Integrity, vice president of Aula, All European Academies, and member of the Aula board and member of the Permanent Working Group on Science and Ethics. So you fit exactly what we need for. So thank you so much for being here, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. How are we going to do it? Maybe.
Yeah, we have you can control the slides.
Yes, the slides to control the slides. See. Change places. This one. Yeah, and you tell me to stop. Yes, battle video. Thank you very much for inviting me to come.
I think that you have to use the microphone.
Okay. Yes. So, can you hear me now? Yeah, and I can sit down so you can hear even better. So thank you very much for inviting me to come to Trento and talk about research integrity. A few words about my background. And the Chancellor Emerita has nothing to do with research integrity. It's just a Finnish, former Finnish position at universities, and some universities in Finland used to have chancellors, and chancellors are really very often retired rectors, and when I retired from my position as rector, I became chancellor, and that was the nicest job I've ever had, because I could define my own responsibilities basically, and not to disturb the rector in her job then. And but one of the roles a chancellor often has is positions in national committees and sort of science policy issues. And one of them was the National Board on Research Integrity in Finland, which I chaired for 9 years, three periods. I just stepped down a month ago. I'm still a member, a permanent member, a kind of an expert member on this committee, which has 10 members from different universities and a chair that is appointed by the Ministry of Education. But that's where it stops, the involvement of the government. It's, you could say the board in Finland is a court without being a court, because you can complain to this board about procedures that have been taken at different universities to investigate allegations of misconduct and or unacceptable practices, if you want to put it that way. The Finnish system has developed over 25 years, and thanks to the fact that we are a small country and relatively homogeneous, and the universities are all public sector universities, and that applies to most research institutes too. So they have signed a kind of a collective oath that they follow the procedures, the guidelines set by the national board. I had a copy of the guidelines but they're available on the internet, or a few copies yesterday, but they all disappeared when I was talking to the students, so they must be around. Yeah. So, and these guidelines are in Finnish, Swedish, the second language in Finland, and in English, so that helps if you want to have a look at them. And because of that role, I've been a member of the Aula, the All-European Academies of Science and Learning, on their permanent working group on science and ethics. And so that's sort of my background for today's talk. Yes. And I was asked to talk about the revised European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity and how can we benefit from it. That's the question I would like to ask. So first, what is the purpose of this European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity? Again, all the copies, print copies disappeared yesterday, but they are available at alea.org. And you can also order print copies if you want to. And they have been translated into Italian, into all the EU languages. That was what the EU Commission did. I don't know whether they have been released, but because it was the EU translators who all translated them into the different languages. But because this is rather a difficult topic in the sense of terminology, I think local organizations have had a check and gone through them. That is about to release them in Finland after a major check, so that they would be comprehensible to the Finnish audience who reused different terminology in some cases. So it is a code of conduct for the research community. You could say it's on a code for how to behave if you're a researcher in that role. And it describes the principles behind good and responsible practices for all disciplines. So there are no restrictions as to. So it's a literature PhD as well as a hard nanotechnology specialist or PhD have to follow these rules. So that's the idea. And it describes why responsible behavior is a sine qua non. What they said in the introduction here today it doesn't make sense to do research if it's not honest, because the results have no effect, actually hamper development. And that's the thinking behind it, and that's the thinking behind it also at the EU level. And who is it for? It's a fairly short document. It's a guideline document. It's for individual researchers, obviously, for research groups, and for research performing institutions. Yeah, good. And so for the University of Trento, I think it's a good background document when you start planning your or what you need to do for your own purposes. And it's also for funding organizations. Then it is not, we did discuss this in the working group, it's not for political decision makers and research performance assessments. And this is something, it would have been good to include it, but it's a hot topic at the moment, and I'll come back to that later. Because after all, if you think of it, it's the political decision makers, the funding organizations, the European level thinking when we try to evaluate and assess everything these days, who set the framework, and researchers follow that framework. Whether the criteria used are sensible is another matter. It's the ideology, I would say, the current public management thinking, or I think it's going away at the moment, but I'll get back to that later. So where does this document come from? We call it the revised edition, because there was an original code from 2011, and it was produced together by a task force where you had members of both Aula and the European Science Foundation. But that document, although there's nothing wrong with it, it's not a guideline. It's fairly long and rambling, repetitive. You could say it's more like a sermon of why good research practices are necessary. And the purpose was then, and it had been approved by the European Commission, but as far as I know, very few people have ever read it. And it was mentioned in the applications, grant applications, that you should follow these principles. So the purpose was to make a shorter and easier to understand version of this code with a guidelines character, and to include stakeholders to comment on the draft version. So EU Commission asked Aula, because ESF European Science Foundation had disappeared in the reorganization processes, to do this, and then there was a small drafting group within the Aula permanent working group. We were about 5-6 people, and we worked on it very intensively for about 6 months. And we had a comments round in writing. We sent it to stakeholders, and then EU contributed by organising a workshop in Brussels at the end of 2016, where we got comments for the draft version, and then we finalized it in so about 2 years ago. EU did in no way the Commission did in no way interfere with the work. So it's because again we wanted to make sure that this was a research community document and not influenced by political thinking, and must say that we're very happy with the way it was organized. And this code is firmly based on the idea of self-regulation of the research community, and come back to what that means in practice. So what is the status of that document? It was endorsed by the Commission as the reference document for the Horizon 2020 calls, and now also for the upcoming Horizon Europe framework program. And as I said, the Commission has organized the translation of it into all the official EU languages. And this is how Commissioner Moedas promoted it in 2017. It's a quote. And that goes back to why EU suddenly realized that they... Thank you. Why the EU realized that they have to do something about it. I remember being at the meeting around 2007, I think it was, where research was discussed. There was a small meeting in general, and when I asked them about, it was about the framework program, I asked them about research integrity or ethics, and the representative, they said, oh, it belongs to the universities, research institutes, it's not our problem. But then there was a major change in the thinking, and trust in science became an issue, and the EU Commission got very worried about the fact that clearly the general public had less trust in science than they used to have. They didn't believe the scientists. And I use science in the wide sense of the word, the German Wissenschaft, applying to all fields. English is a bit complicated with the word science. Sometimes it's everything, sometimes only natural sciences. And with their open science agenda, this became, of course, even more important. So this is the background. It's endorsed. So if you are part of an EU project, then you're committed to following the principles in the research integrity in your work, or the institutions are. And then there's this question that was already mentioned, that integrity is a somewhat difficult concept. It really refers to your individual behavior or the institution's behavior at the level, so that the institutions, research funders promote responsible, honest research. And how does it relate to research ethics? We had an issue with that in Finland, because we called our previous guidelines were called guidelines for responsible or good practices in research ethics. But then it was, I think, mostly through American influence, global influence, started making a distinction between ethics and integrity, in the sense that ethics is understood as the umbrella concept, and research integrity being part of research ethics. There's by no means a consensus on, but for practical purposes, it helps to write guidelines that belong to the whole research community or refer to, or then you have the normative codes in areas where you need them, like lab practices, bioethics, animal care, medical. In the medical field, you have special committees on these, either usually at national level, that issue the normative codes and that review for example, research proposals for medical research. But they intertwine and overlap so there's no question about that. So, but I'm going to concentrate on research integrity, which is the code's message, so to say. So how normative is this code? And how long is it valid for? You say it is definitely a framework document. So it reflects the views of the research community of what responsible conduct of research entails. And it allows for national and local differences, and its implementation into institutional codes, national codes, may vary. So it's something that you can use as a basis for your own more detailed codes. And then we have been very happy at Alea about the fact that this code, unlike its previous version, is pretty well known, and it has been accepted as the framework document. So its role as something that, okay, we build on this to make our own code, but these are the principles behind it. And it's intended to be a living document. In other words, it needs to be updated regularly. We envisage then that maybe an update would be needed in about 3 years' time. I think we're going to wait a bit longer because the part that is missing from this code is the open science side. So to open access, there's some mentions of open access, open data, and the whole concept of open science. And they are, these principles are emerging from different sources. One of the latest one is the Plan S by funding organizations. Science Europe was one of the instigators of this process. And it's about publishing in open access journals and what rules should apply. I'll mention that later as well. So we have to wait to get a kind of a consensus view that what could be go into the code. So who does the code apply to, or who could benefit from the code? All researchers, obviously, peers, seniors, juniors, research groups, projects, and the research community in general. So I would say that typically, if you think of training in research integrity, it's directed at PhD students, graduate school, at graduate school level. But what we notice, at least in Finland, is that one group that needs targeting is the seniors, the professors, the PIs in projects, and it has more to do with attitudes. It was mentioned that too much bureaucracy and it's hampering. I mean, these threats that are perceived about regulations and rules. And there was a study in Finland. One of the members of our committee did that with students in education, or the PhD students in education, and about whether they had encountered shady practices and how they had been dealt with and that sort of thing. And the result was that, yes, they need, the students asked for more training and more targeted courses and discussions, but they said but the common question was about who should train the trainers. And of course, I mean, that was, you could say that it was a wake-up call, let's put it this way, because it's not so easy to get professors to sit down and say that. You can't go set in your rules that every professor should go through research integrity training every 3 years. I don't think that would be a very popular measure. But also research performing organizations, universities, research institutes can benefit from this code because what is usually or very often forgotten is that research integrity is about the quality of your university. This is not how it's perceived, and I'd be surprised to see that because there are all sorts of quality assurance systems and that are in force at universities. What you have and quality control books and so on, but they don't include research integrity. But in a way, I think should be one of the first things to say that this is part, and that turns it into something different. It's something we want to be sure that all our theses and doctoral theses or research is done with that, is conducted with good research practices in mind. And that might turn the attitude at universities if you realize that is one of the core functions of the university, so to say. And one of the spin-offs, you could say, of the code is the bond printager statement. Printager was one of these big EU projects, and one of their deliverables was working with research integrity guidance for organizations, and that has appeared in I think I'll mention it later in a journal, and it's also available on the web page of the Printager project. And that describes then what institutions need to think of when they establish their own systems. And funding organizations, of course, for them it's also quality assurance that they are using public money for a good purpose. So the Printager statement contains recommendations. It helps institutions to put into practice the guidelines. So it's not a very long article, and it makes you sort of say, have we dealt with this at our own institutions? How do we know? How do the students, the PhD students or peers know who to turn to if they suspect that something is wrong with a research project or with the procedures they use? And that's often, I think, that's one of the typical situations at many universities. They know that there are these guidelines, they tick the box, then they forget about it. But when something happens, because it doesn't happen very often, they don't know where to go and what to do. So they talk with their peers and are angry, but that's where it stops. And nobody really knows whose responsibility it is to take it further. So that is, again, a framework document of what could be done. Well, what sort of principles then were the background or the backbone, you could say, of the Alea Code? So we discussed this at length, but then ended up with this division of the continuum. There are many ways of doing it, but reliability, yes. Ensuring the quality of the research, design, methodology, honesty in developing, undertaking, reviewing, reporting, respect for colleagues. This is I think a very important aspect these days because, or has always been, but has been taken for granted. But this comes to the fore these days because most research is done in projects. And if you compete with your colleague and if you want your name on the article, and all these things come into play. Also when in recruitment processes, in evaluation and being a reviewer of an article and so on. And accountability from the beginning to the end, so from the idea to publication, for the management, for the training of the participants, supervision, mentoring, all these aspects. So where is the focus? And this is, I think, where research integrity in many cases meets research ethics and codes. I mean, it's the research environment, the research culture, the transparent procedures at the institution, for the institution that they make sure that there's training and supervision and mentoring available, research procedures, publication principles, safeguards that you comply with the regulations that are relevant to your field, data practices and management. And this is, of course, a very big issue now with the open science agenda and open data agenda. And this is the FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. That's the in the ideal world. A year ago, I attended a workshop where they discussed, open data experts discussed all the issues and said that if 2 of these principles are enforced in 5 years, we're lucky. But of course, this is the ideal we should strive for. The collaborative working that all partners, if you think of the multinational EU project, that you have to take responsibility for the integrity and deal with the issues. That you have to have formal agreements. And this is the publication and dissemination side, that all authors are responsible for the content unless otherwise specified. And this caused a lot of discussion because there are traditions in different fields that your name is on the article if you are a senior professor who's applied for the funding or head of the department. You automatically get your name on all the articles. Maybe some fields, not all, and that's not enough. I mean, the ancillary documents now describe in many cases what is needed to get authorship for an article. What should you do? I mean, it's not something you get for nothing or by being there in a certain position. But this is still very much in the making as well. And of course, then you're responsible for the content as well. So if your name is on an article and there's something wrong with the article, it's plagiarized or there are fabrications in it, you're responsible even if you haven't read it or taken part in its making. And there was a big scandal in Norway some 10, 15 years ago, and there was a big name in dentistry professor who, in practice, faked all the results, but co-published with other eminent scholars. And when they realized this problem, what was happening when they got caught, then all the co-authors said that, well, we never took part in this research. We were just asked to give our names to the publication. And of course we knew he was a reliable, well-known scientist. So of course we were happy to add our names to the publication. And this is not the only case. And also your role in reviewing, editing, evaluating, editing, you should follow these principles. So what does the code then say about violations of research integrity? It describes first the good practices, responsible research, and then in the second part of what is wrong. So it's a very traditional division, this FFP, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism. Those are the big sins. But they're all also something that can be called unacceptable practices, and give examples of them. You can't list all of them. And this here, what makes the difference is that in some countries, particularly plagiarism very often, and fabrication, falsification, so the big sins are in the legal code. So if something happens there, it's a legal issue and could end up as a court case. In some countries, like Finland, the science community or research community believes in self-regulation, believes in that science and research is self-corrective. So it wants to deal with these cases inside. And it very, very much depends on how these misconduct cases or violations are perceived. But what is important, nevertheless, in the local or national codes, that there are clear procedures on how they are investigated, so that they have to be consistent at the university level, confidential, and they always mention the whistleblower protection, but whistleblower protection is a very difficult issue. It's the European Organization for Research, National Research Integrity Offices, ENRIO, has tackled or is tackling this issue. And who is a whistleblower? If a senior professor is a whistleblower, says that something is wrong with their practices, does he need or she need protection? Usually, the one who needs protection is the junior PhD student in a group, who is dependent on the PI, for example, on the funding of the research, who does not have a permanent contract with the university, and are they protected then if they blow the whistles, say, or are there repercussions? So it's a big issue. And of course, the procedures should be fair to all parties in the investigation. So if you're alleged of misconduct, it has to be proven first. You can be condemned, and that is, of course, a difficult issue because media are very interested in all sorts of scandals. So how to keep them confident? And what are unacceptable practices? And these are the ones that are listed as examples in the code. Manipulating authorship, we already talked about it. Republishing this substantive parts of one's own earlier publications without giving the source. So-called self-plagiarism. It's entirely okay to quote yourself. But if you mention that you published it earlier and where you published it earlier, but if you quote yourself without telling that you already published it, then it's self-plagiarism. And then something that's typical in some journals that you cite selectively, okay, or to please the reviewers, or you withhold research results. You get negative results and you don't publish them because they might not support your hypothesis. And there's the publishers talking about it, or interested in research ethics, talk about research waste. All the research that's done that doesn't give results that are according to the hypothesis, they don't get published, and then somebody else does it again. So this discussion of whether there should be more emphasis on negative results. And further examples are unacceptable practices. The interesting thing in this code is that usually these unacceptable practices in older codes, other codes, are called minor misdemeanors, questionable research practices. And we wanted to get away from this definition that in a way condones it, saying, okay, it's a slap on the fingers, don't do it again. We wanted to say that this is entirely unacceptable. And they can be sanctionable, depends on the national or institutional codes. But there certainly are issues that should be dealt with in training. What about sanctions then? Sanctions depend on the status of the offender usually. It's the institutions that issue the sanctions. And very often, I would say the sanctions are misunderstood by the instigators of the allegations, because they would like to see them hang. They're very angry if the sanction is that you have to inform the journal that there's one author is missing, for example, or that there was that this has been discussed and there was a violation, and that's usually the sanction. It's not a criminal sanction. And again, sanctions sometimes in the legal code, sometimes in the self-regulation codes. So trust in research is essential. And most researchers, that we'll always need to keep in mind, tend to be honest. But offenders can get away if suspicions are not voiced. And so I would say that trust is essential, but so is healthy mistrust. Self-regulation works if it's monitored. Self-regulation doesn't work if there's nobody to see, check. That's a common experience. So it should be, as I said, part of the quality assurance. And national level guidelines, national level monitoring is probably the best tool at the moment. If you only have it at the institutional level, that might lead to cover-ups, or has led to cover-ups and shady practices. So what is the potential impact of this code? I think the code will hopefully lead to soft harmonization, a similar way of thinking, and then putting it into practice in the local fashion. What is possible? Political responsibility, I promise to return to this at the end. So make research great again. And this is sort of, how should we assess the performance of researchers? And these are the questions, types of questions we should ask the political decision makers. So how come that predominantly quantitative criteria, number of publications per year, are used to measure quality? And do quantitative criteria encourage researchers to engage in curiosity-driven research? One of the big questions. And do the funding criteria take into account that research takes time and that the outcomes are not always predictable? There's a few. And I think that if we changed the system we evaluate, because it's very easy to count and number of publications, changed and took into account the fact that research is a long time endeavor. We might get rid of many of the bad practices. So I mentioned the open data, open access, open issues. These very open issues at the moment. And open access journals, predatory journals. There is an attempt, there is a list of responsible open access journals. This is the directory of open access journals that lists responsible journals. We want to Plan S now about publication and funding and where one should publish, but that was like an ultimatum, and it still allows for these the big publishers to. I mean, they have found the winning concept. I mean, researchers do the work, they publish the work, the publishers take paid for that, and the university buys back its own products. So, I mean, invest in big publishers if you want to get rich, I would say. And this is what the Science Europe and others are fighting against. Aula responded to this plan by saying that we need to look at the whole research system and talk with all the actors in it. And this was just currently last autumn. So I think what the research world wants now is to stop counting and start reading. And that's where I'd like to finish. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Krista. A lot of food for thought, and I'm sure that we will come back to a number of issues in the debate. Now we can jump to our second speaker, Gianni Tognoni. He's a member of the Mario Negri Institute in Milan. He's the president of the Ethics Committee here at the Azienda Provinciale dei Servizi Sanitari in Trento. And as I briefly mentioned, he will deal with the role of Ethics Committee in this complex stuff, dealing with research integrity.
Questo qui per andare un po'? Sì, dovrebbe. Esatto, per andare indietro così.
Okay, thanks for the invitation. I think my approach would be a bit different from what has been proposed, which is based on a looking forward perspective with the optimism of having some compliance with recommendation. As I am by profession beside or before being a member or president of the ethical committee, I've been a researcher for more or less 40 years in the medical field, in clinical trial and in public health. And on the other side, I say that because that will be the reason why I'm making some quotes. I am part of an international organization working on human rights, and since I think that integrity has a lot to do with human rights, because at the end, the purpose of integrity is to assure that the human rights to correct knowledge is a fundamental component of human rights, though is most of the time left aside under the umbrella of ethics, while human rights are something which has to do with basic fundamental rights of people. So my presentation will be looking for two sides for integrity and research, and then I will concentrate on the last part, on the ethical committee's role, if any, because my presentation will be full of questions more than of answer, with some proposal. The first is integrity, and I think that it's important to have, it has been said already, the idea that integrity is a very ambiguous word. It could be a kind of, say, statement where everybody understands that we must look for integrity, having the idea that integrity is possible. I think that is important to have integrity as a key research question. I think that today integrity is something which has to do with research on integrity, if any, with respect to the general framework. So the first point is just terms of reference, and I make some quotations simply to justify the fact that what I am saying has to do with what is going on in debates in the scientific field. And the first is a quotation from a philosopher of law, which is Upendra Bakshi. He's an important professor which is teaching in India, in UK, in Australia, so he's very knowledgeable in the field. And he has published a book which is, I think, very interesting, not as a provocation, but really as a statement. The thesis is that we are living now in a post-human era, in the sense that all what has to do with globalization today consider that human beings as a dependent variable from other actors which have to do mainly with economics, plan of development, global ideas. Just to give the idea of what is so important, if you take one of the major journals in the medical field, like The Lancet, which was considered once a source of integrity where everything is respected, the conflict of interest, the main topics which are published in The Lancet today has to do with the global health. Global health means that in the idea of globalization, that you have to have a global view of health, but in order to have a global view of health, you put together all the states as if all the states could be comparable. So the statistics are published with all the algorithms which assure that data are controlled, but in fact they are talking always about the burden of diseases. The human beings do not exist. Diseases are present, and what is important is the global burden of disease. Diseases are becoming an economic variable, what is sustainable from the economic point of view. What is integrity in this post-human world, where those who are the actors who could be responsible for the community of researchers are in fact themselves possibly dependent on other actors, which are, for instance, looking for granting situations. The Lancet publications, all of them in the global health, are supported, and is a declared conflict of interest, but it's a conflict of interest. They are supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is obviously a not independent granting agency. And in that sense, obviously, everything has to do with a model of development of research, which leaves aside, and Bill and Melinda Gates is also supporting WHO, and without Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, WHO could not act. In that sense, it makes one point that is today the distinction between private and public funding has become a very obsolete idea, because also in the European Union, if you do not present a research which has some industrial investments or investment implication, your request is hardly acceptable, because it's said that it's not sustainable. It's not possible to translate it into practice without going through the market rules. So that's important as a general framework, and that is not simply a declaration. If you see the conflict of interest, which is one of the key criteria for integrity, all the research are depending on, as I said, interests which are structured inside that. Take, for instance, here in the Committee on Trento, we have many research now which are looking for development of artificial intelligence, robot, something like that. It is clear that that is looking for something which will occur possibly in a near distant future, nobody knows, but certainly that is something which is supported strongly by those who are looking for developing of technology, of artificial intelligence and similar disciplines. And if you see important journal like Science, say, this is an editorial by Sir John Beddington, which is one of the major responsible for science in UK. And he says in the editorial for a dossier that please try to keep science as horizon of your investigation, because scientific enterprise is a victim, and the terms is very strong in terms of law, is a victim of political fallout. And that is something which is important to take into account, because science represents, like nature, all the investigation. And if we imagine that, for instance, ethical committee do exist for mainly medical disciplines, it's difficult to find ethical committee with some rules, procedure, accountability. If you take, for instance, economic investigation, or engineering investigation, or climate investigation, they have a very, very soft law behind them. And soft law is a very interesting, flexible word, but is in fact hiding the fact that they are not binding obligation in soft law. The third is the philanthrocapitalism in global health and nutrition. That is a group was published Global Policy, Health and Innovation, which is again a very interesting word. Everything for research should be innovative. Now, if you see what is innovative in science, in the medical field, is a very challenging task, because what has been said before, there is not plagiarism possibly in an open way, but is a kind of, say, adjustments. The non-inferiority trials in medical area are very interesting. You could innovate simply by modifying some technology. No results are different in terms of attributability of benefit to human being, but certainly are increasing the cost of technology and drugs. And in that sense, if you take nutrition, which is one of the major problems, not simply because of overweight or obese, but simply hunger, now who is controlling the policies of those who are working in nutritional industry, the costs of major things? We are spectators of repeated, say, information on hunger problems in different fields of the world, and in that sense, it's clear that the multinational corporations, which are once again under the challenge of preparing codes of conduct, but I think that the first time they were fighting for the codes of conduct for the multinational for back in the 70s, they are still discussing that about the codes of conduct for multinationals in the pharmaceutical field, nutritional field, all innovation, and the main goal is to obtain at least an ethical code, not a binding code, which is very important, because if, for instance, you document that, as the question is repeated, that inequality is obviously producing inequity, the problem is to say whether in fact to document ever again that inequality is producing inequity, and nothing is said about avoidability of inequality. It is clear that the diagnosis of inequality is just as a doctor, I say to somebody, you have a very fatal disease, sorry for you. But it is so because it is so. So I think that the framework is not an optimistic one in the area of that, because if we have to do research in this area, it is clear that we have to have the idea of where this framework. If you see the European Union with granting funds for research, it is more and more clear that that is the control of few major groups, because if you impose that research should be done in 3, 4, 5 countries to have a critical mass of investigators to produce that, you have to have enough funds in order to put together an efficient network, because otherwise you are not competing with other investigators, and in that sense you concentrate those who are selecting the priorities instead of favoring the priorities for unmet needs, which has become again a very interesting repeated word. We have many unmet needs, but the unmet needs remain unmet because those who are in fact investigated most of the time are areas where in fact you have already an important financial support from political decisions. If you decide, for instance, and I go for the second point in health, if you declare that health is a right, if it is economically sustainable, then it's very difficult to meet unmet needs, for instance, for mental health. And mental health is periodically quoted in research fields as an orphan disease, which is a very strange point, because from the other side, orphan diseases are defined as those diseases who are very rare. Mental health is very frequent, especially if you broaden the spectrum of mental area from schizophrenia to depression, depression in the elderly, depression in young people who commit suicide. So it's not a rare disease. It's a difficult problem of society which has to be faced with investment of society, not simply of psychiatrists. And just to give you the idea, the editor-in-chief of JAMA, who is the responsibility of the American Medical Association, there are very recent, I selected some quotation from the last 3-4 months in the major journals. They are using now, after the Obamacare, all the debates on that the key words now in the United States, not simply for Trump, because Trump has modified something but did not have enough time to abolish the Obamacare Act. The key word is rationing in healthcare, is not rationalizing. The rationalization of cost of expenses has become really a rationing, which is a kind of exclusion criteria. And the exclusion is the principal violation of interest in health, which once was declared to be a human right. Now, to declare health human right, trying to add to human right the concept of a binding value or a binding law is difficult. Health as human right is a more or less forbidden word in the World Health Organization documents, because if you declare that health is human right and is a universal human right, not a global human rights, but universal means for each of them, they say always, no one should be left behind. That is the main claim and recommendation, like for the movement of women in defense of violence against women, no one should be left behind, but the statistics says that in fact feminicide is increasing at a global level. And the rationing is really a very critical word, because that could be one question to be posed in this area of research. Let's aside now economy, social. I'm working as a president in an ethical committee in a university which is important in Italy, like the Bicocca, where they are working on psychology, economy, sociology. I think that the experience to have that committee looking for those research, all those recommendations are void words because they don't have any criteria. For instance, for a trial, you have to look for, say, efficacy of a drug to improve the outcome of patients. What are the endpoints for a research on algorithm in economy, where each time they discover the algorithm, by definition, are biased, and the transparency of algorithms is wishful thinking, because all of them have the right to apply their algorithm without looking at the consequences of that, because they say they have to apply the algorithm. They have to apply to algorithm to increase this inequality, and what happens to those who have been the victims of this algorithm. The problem is that the transparency, which is one of the points, and in Europe and in the Lancet itself, there is a very interesting, important article, 9 pages of the Lancet, and they take one area for medical devices in Europe. Medical devices today in health are even more important than drugs, because devices are now everything which has to do with, say, genetic diagnosis and different things. And they declare, in fact, that there is no transparency at all in Europe about transparency at official level. Because what is transparency on medical devices? Up to now, a medical device should be accepted in Europe if they comply with technological qualities, not with the impact on health. And medical devices, in that sense, become devices which have to comply with electrical rules in order to cause immediately some strange effect, but the efficacy or the effectiveness, the transallability of those medical devices should be made transparent, not simply to be accepted as something which has been controlled for the good manufacturing practices, not with the good clinical practice for real human beings. And if we go on, it's interesting to see that now the big chapter of the big data, which has become so fashionable now, because everybody is very excited with big data, because if you are applying data mining techniques in order to explore big databases, you could, as Facebook does, or nobody or anybody could do, they are simply looking for an investigation which could produce something which is against the basic principle of science, that you have to have an hypothesis to be looked for. You can't be data-driven. And big data are data-driven. And that is, again, in science, in a group working on technology, whether they say, what is the border between government data or public data and commercial clouds? Data are part of the market of big companies in order to investigate what are the priorities of whom? Of unmet needs, or of those who have to invest in some area of, say, market. If you take the cost of cancer drugs today, everybody says that they are really unethical. because they are decided by those who are producing those drugs. The benefits are measured most of the time in terms of 2-3 months of increased survival, with few exceptions. The costs are corresponding most of the time with the full year of treatment of hundreds of patients for just one person who could have, as personal right, if they are recognized, some improvement in their life expectancy in terms of few months. Try to imagine that drug costs in, say, Latin America, wherever, where you don't have an health system which is covering not through insurances, but through a national service, and as it is the case now in Italy, the cost of cancer drugs are in fact 10 times what is given to, say, for instance, mental disorders. And certainly mental patients are more numerous than cancer patients who are needing those very costly drugs. And in that sense, where you are examining the data, and the presentation before was very clear, you have to look for the correctness of the procedure in order to see whether the hypothesis is rationally formulated and something like that. And the transparency, which means public access, the control, the question here, will public access suffer? And the editorial say it will very, very much suffer on that, but what to do? And in that sense, another area which is very fashionable now, big data on one side, on the other side, precision medicine. I am able to target your personal need, which is true for a rare group of patients where you could identify, and it will be progressively better identify, some genetic characteristics, some genetic and epigenetic characteristics, which make you really the person who could benefit from that drugs. But in that sense, the declaration here and the other journal I quoted, the New England Journal of Medicine, where most of the papers were supporting precision medicine, but they are, after few years of precision medicine, say that, is that really innovation, novelty, or is just a kind of, sum of claims which do not produce really a new way of facing the problem in science. And I am quoting here something which we have been doing about, say, artificial intelligence with colleague is a general practitioner, and he was proposing to have a series of articles on artificial intelligence, big data, starting from the general practice. People are in fact exposed to all those promises about artificial intelligence, precision medicine, and they are exposed to promise that you could target your nutrition according to your genetic map and characteristics. And he says, but what happens where also the general practitioners, those who could be or should be the mediators of science produced in scientific group and people, are in fact themselves exposed by patients, because patients have access to the big data and internet and something like that. They are becoming consumers because before being persons who are looking for an answer for their need. To say that these problems are not simply problems of science, but they are becoming problems of the society. And the problem of transparency and accessibility to the real information is a critical issue. So I go now for the ethical committees to see whether, and I think that here those who are working in ethical committee at local level, or Carlo is working also at the national level, the problem of the ethical committee is not so much about the procedures of the ethical committee. I think they have to do with the representativeness. Who is represented in ethical committees? We have rules which say that we have a representative of patients, possibly a representative of nursing personnel. As far as I have been working since the 80s in the first ethical committee, to have patient representative who could speak on the contents of the clinical trial research are really an exception. They are more concentrated on informed consent. Now, informed consent is recognized to be the most useless instrument for informing patients because nobody could understand it. Neither the investigators, most of the time, can understand fully if they have to look or work in a, for instance, protocol of precision medicine. The type of information which is there is really beyond the reach of most of those who have to do with even very good clinical trials. So the representatives of ethical committee, even if they are at, now they say they have to concentrate and to have national ethical committees. National ethical committee is possibly a bigger bias in that sense because they do not represent the variability of the opinions in the scientific community. And that is clear also in the literature. Why ethical committee should concentrate in few persons the judgment on something which needs a debate, because the representativeness should be the representatives also of the variability. What is the power of ethical committee? The power of ethical committee is just to say yes most of the time. To say no, but what happens? You have to exclude your local doctors from investigation because you do not allow them to participate in a research. The European Union, in this sense, is a model of non-compliance with the duty. I think that they have declared they are reforming ethical committees since 7 years. How many consultations? They are not so effective like your independent group, because you are doing that. Now, they say that Europe is not able yet to have a common portal where to register the trial. Do you believe that? That at European level it's not possible to have a site where you can register trials? It is clear that they are postponing, and nothing happens. And it gives the idea of this impotence, and therefore I think that the ethical committee should be considered really a challenge for the ethical committee in this situation. And I propose something. The problem, obviously, the ethical committee should be independent. From whom? Is a question mark, because certainly they should be independent from the local authorities who are nominating the ethical committee. But then if you have part of a community of research where most of the hospitals are participating in research and you declare that your hospital cannot participate, your investigators are favored or not, I think that is a problem which we are facing in ethical committee, and here in Trento is already an interesting situation. You have an ethical committee at the university, an ethical committee of the hospital. Where is the border between what is directly referred to human? We have made some rules, we try to comply, but it's a very difficult, challenging exercise. The literature, the research on how to guarantee independence in some area is an area where research is not done. Ethical committees are more exposed to procedures. They are declaring how long should you take to prepare a judgment, but in fact is something which is really, and let's aside the Italian legislation, which is a kind of, say, part of the political scenario of Italy, where in fact at central level, the central committee, they have declared, for instance, they will have a separate committee for pediatric research. Why is an independent committee for pediatric research? Nobody knows. Not for the elderly people where in fact the investigations are for nothing. How many investigations have been made on Alzheimer's disease, where the plausibility of the idea to be explored for Alzheimer's disease have been recognized even by the drug developers. They have abandoned Alzheimer's diseases because they don't know what they are looking for. And in that sense, obviously, the situation is very difficult. The problem is whether ethical committee, and we have discussed many times, are ethical committee those who have to control all what comes, or they are really those who should be looking for promoting good research, which appear to be an obvious situation. But promoting good research should be to promote independent, also local research. For instance, ethical committee should not ask for being paid by independent investigators who are producing research, but that administratively is not allowed. An investigation which is not touching problem of safety, but if they don't pay the insurance, they cannot be done. And so the costs are increasing in that sense. And that is again one of the problems, how to make ethical committees capable of promoting research in order to give the idea also to those who are really preparing something which is not perfect from the procedural point of view. We are trying, for instance, in our committee to help investigators, say, when they present a protocol which is not satisfactory, to support the preparation of a good protocol, so that the protocol could be, in fact, meeting the procedural request, but with the help of somebody else. Otherwise, they cannot have statistics and something like that at their disposal. And in that sense, that could be one way of thinking on future or present ethical committee. And certainly the ethical committee, I repeat once again and the last time, in medical field are already a very good advance. In La Bicocca in Milan, and we were discussing that also with the university, there was a proposition to say if, for instance, psychological research, which is an important part of research, take, for instance, the investigation of how young people become dependent on social media and how they are dependent on all those information, is a problem of the society. You have to promote multi-center research. Psychologists are not happy with the multi-center trials or multi-center investigation. They prefer to be on their own. Is that tolerable? While we know that so many variables are included in the area, they present sometimes that they are investigating, applying the criteria, age limits. Person from 6 to 19 years of age. Can you imagine that young people from 6 to 19 years of age is an homogeneous group? Who could believe that? But I say, but in my place, we do not have enough people, of young people saying all what has to do with mainstream disease now, the autistic children or young people. Certainly they are a critical population, both for treatment, for the outcome. They are not concentrated in one place. They have to be multi-center. How to promote multi-center trials in order to be really credible in that sense is a problem of the scientific community. Multidisciplinarity is a good word, but it's difficult to overcome the disciplinarity of most of the area where we are working. Let's aside the multidisciplinarity between those who are working in health and economy, because in that sense the university, they don't know the language of each other, and in that sense to put together collaborative protocol is a very big challenge, and I think ethical committee should do that. We have already talked on that, and I finished. The administrative goals of ethical committee should be really decreased, both in the presentation of documentation, because they are presenting curriculum vitae or so many people and something like that, and the amount of paper or electronic documents which are presented have nothing to do with real research, and the contents and the culture of research should be the time, but in principle, the ethical committee cannot judge, and the European Union is going in that direction. They cannot judge the content, or they pretend that the content should be evaluated by an independent group with respect to those who are considering administrative group, area protocol part A, part B, and they are saying that that is something which should be taken into consideration. It's interesting to imagine that the ethical committee, to be representative, should be in a network of ethical committee. In Trento here, we have tried to put together a group of a network of ethical committee to talk to each other in order to share experience, doubts, something like that. But it's very, very difficult. Our colleagues are working hard to maintain an attention to that, but the contribution, while everybody is saying in Facebook or other, I like, but to say like or not like is so easy. But to produce comments which could be really constructive or something is completely different, and that should be really considered a key role and responsibility of ethical committee, the creation of a language of interaction where doubts are shared in order to increase the idea of how complex and variable is the scenario where we are working. And I close with the accountability, which has been really one of the key issues, and correctly so, on what has been said before. But how to assure accountability, for instance, to the public opinion? We have tried hard with very little results to declare that ethical committee should produce their periodical account, not simply for the quality control, internal quality control that they have been good, but to propose to the public opinion in a way which is really informing, not like informed consent, what happens in research. Research, that was one of the main points at the beginning, the trust in research is decreasing. But certainly research is not doing anything to be accountable, not only for big success, which is a bias, is a manipulation of public opinion, to produce only good results. It is important to share doubts, uncertainty, because democracy is the title of another editorial in Science, democracy at risk, talking about science. If science remains independent, that has been said, scientific community, but if it's not accountable routinely for the doubts they have, and we have so many doubts in science, then the public opinion will not increase its capacity of democracy, and in that sense, the probability of respecting rights will decrease, because only a very dialectical accountability could assure a dialogue between science and society. Thanks.
Gianni, for your provocative realism. And now we have 15 minutes break. Everybody's invited at the symposio downstairs. And so we can come back at 11:30. Okay, as mentioned before the third level, the third perspective of this meeting deals with the local dimension, the dimension of the University of Trento. We have Cinzia Picciocchi. She's a professor here at the Faculty of Law. She's director delegate in the Organism for Animal Well-being, the OPBA, welfare, and the scientific director of Integra, the strategic project that hosts this meeting. So, Cinzia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I will give you just a very brief overview of why we decided to start with this project, Integra Trento Research, and I say we because it's, of course, Carlo Casonato, me, and many other colleagues. Some of them are here today, and thanks to them all, because we thought from the beginning that this kind of project can only be interdisciplinary, so we have to collaborate among different disciplines. Why we decided, and we thought that a research project on integrity of research integrity could be useful. The answer is that we thought it was necessary. It is not more an option. If we look at Horizon 2020, you can see that there is a provision concerning ethical appraisal steps, and different subjects are involved, since the applicant as well as ethics experts are involved in the ethical evaluation of the project, of your proposal. There are different steps, and we had the perception that sometimes the ethical steps are perceived as something which come at least, then you don't focus on it very much. And we thought that a common reasoning about it was necessary. If we look, when I say it is not a choice, if you look at the model grant for the lucky and very good researcher that won Horizon 2020, at Article 34, there is an obligation to comply with ethical principles, and it states that the beneficiaries must respect the highest standards of research integrity. And they also give a kind of definition of what research integrity is, which was our first question, what are we speaking about? Honesty, reliability, objectivity, impartiality, open communication, duty of care, fairness, and responsibility for future science generations. If the researcher do not respect this principle, it is not just an ethical commitment or something you choose, you promise we will stick on it. It is an obligation, because if you don't respect Article 34, there are very serious consequences. In case of substantial breach of the ethical principles, research integrity, or relevant legislation, of course, the Commission can carry out an ethics audit following the provisions and procedures laid down in the grant agreement. The checks and audits can result in an amendment of the grant agreement. In severe cases, it can lead upon the decision of a Commission services to a reduction of the grant, its termination, or any other appropriate measure. So the answer why we decided that we think that this research project was necessary, because it is an obligation. It is also something which is very interesting from a research point of view, but most of all it is an obligation. So the first thing we have done is trying to look for a definition, what is research integrity? I have to say that we had many documents to look at. The first one has been already reminded by Professor Varantona, is the ALIA code. Here is a very brief definition of what is ALIA, is a European Federation of Academic Science and Humanities, but I skip on it because it has already been addressed by Professor Svarantola. And the basic four principles are the same you can find in the definition of research integrity given by the European Commission I showed you before. And the four words, the key words, are always the same. The one is reliability, ensuring the quality of research. The second is honesty, reporting and communicating research in a transparent, fair, full and unbiased way, so dealing with communication, respect for everyone, colleagues, research participants, society, ecosystem, cultural heritage, very interesting, and environment, and another keywords, accountability for the research from idea to publication, management, organization, training, supervision, mentoring, and for its wider impact. Another document is very similar, is the research integrity definition given by Science Europe, which is another organization, and the words used are very similar to the 4 principles mentioned by Dalea, especially the misuse of research data, authorship-related misdemeanors, inadequate leadership and mentorship, and the failure to adequately deal with alleged cases of research misconduct. So once again, the 4 principles and research misconduct. The last document I'm showing you is another very important document, is the Singapore Statement on Research Integrity. It was released by the Second World Conference on Research Integrity in Singapore, of course, in 2010. And all these documents are not legally binding. They are what we lawyers define as soft law. So once again, it uses the similar words, the 4 principles. Sorry, it is here. No. Here it is. The 4 principles, once again, honesty, accountability, professional courtesy and fairness, and good stewardship on research on behalf of others, and a list of 14 responsibilities. So, just some few statements about what I have understood till now and what is still unclear to me. What I have understood about research integrity. First, it is a personal responsibility, but also a collective accountability. So my action as an individual have consequences on the entire community of research. It is dealing also with actions. There is an individual and collective dimensions. Every single action is important to build a reliable framework. If we want to be reliable, we have to always remember that our actions contribute to our reliability as a research community. If there is public funding requires accountability towards societies. This is particularly true for public research institutions, and university is one of them. As a lawyer, I know the states trust science, the science we teach in university, the science which is the medical conception which is used in the hospitals, the medicine you will find by your general practitioners is based on a certain conceptions of science. Not everything is science. So there is a special relationship between the state and science respects the field of science. So that's another reason why science must respect research integrity. Research integrity is a multi-phase topic. It deals with legal regulation, but it deals also with ethical concerns, but also with moral issues. And here comes what is still unclear to me. We have different fields, and I wonder if, since research integrity is a very comprehensive concept, I wonder if we have to deal with different themes in the same manner. I mean that, for example, many of the examples that have been mentioned today are in the field of the so-called science, like medicine, science, physics, but not a lawyer, for example. I give you a very little example, we do not have the problem of signatures in our article because we never have more than one author, generally speaking, in our work. So I wonder if it is possible to address with the same concept research integrity subjects which are so different one from the other. Second, Professor Varantola said that ALEA and research integrity relies on the idea that academic fields should be a kind of self-regulation, and research integrity does not come necessarily from the legal enforcement, but from a self-enforcement, self-regulation. I agree that universities are committed to that, but I wonder if it works even for the private sector. This is something which is still unclear to me. We speak of openness, honesty, which are I share these principles, but especially in the hard sciences, research is a highly competitive field, which is legitimate. It is not a crime, it is not a mistake. So I wonder how to cope with legitimate expectation of competition among scientists and this principle of these good principles of sharing, transparency, honesty, and so on. Another problem we are facing, which is still unclear to me, when we speak about these principles, reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability, they are rather different if we are looking at them from the perspective of ethics, of law, of social behaviors. I don't know to name them, maybe good manners, something like that. They belong to these 4 areas, but these 4 areas are very different from the other. So once again, how to cope with so different fields with the same definition of research integrity? I give you some examples. When we speak about the professor and student relation, we must have, for example, courtesy. It is in our ethical code at the University of Trento. We must respect each other. But this is not enforceable. And this is dealing with what? Academic rules, cultures. Plagiarism is the main example we make when we speak of research integrity. You do not cheat, and plagiarism is prohibited. In Italy, it is a crime. So it is addressed by the law, and you can also have economic damages because plagiarism. So my question is, how can we cope with this, which is a crime, but also something which deals with honesty and respect? Because these are very different concepts, the one from the other. Once again, many examples concerning, we look at how universities teach research integrity in different universities, and there are a lot of amazing video examples. Many of these examples deal with the relationship between mentor and PhD students. And once again, these are not enforceable. They are based on academic rules, or are we speaking of ethics, good manners again? Final. The same problem of plagiarism. When we speak of the misuse of data, we can have the honesty. It is not it is not at all an honest behavior, but it may imply also legal consequences. It could be a fraud, and it also deal with ethics. So what is still difficult to understand and which is still unclear to me is this comprehensive concept which entails different things, the one from the other. I finish with this question mark, and maybe some will answer to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cinzia. Let me just add, before open the debate, that our university has a code of ethics, and it deals with research integrity, among other things. I mean, in my opinion, is a kind of mix-up. It's not very clearly specified the different realm and, concepts in it. But, for instance, Article 17 provide for the commission for the implementation of the Code of Ethics, and this commission also deals with a kind of disciplinary procedure, assisting the rector in determining infringements and sanctions for the breach of the same code. The procedure probably is not a very good procedure, for instance, because the procedure for violation begins with the submission of a report to the rector, directly to the rector, while we have a number of examples, and maybe this could be a better way, that provide for an intermediate figure between the person, the student, the professor, or whoever, and the rector, an ombudsman or kind of ethics advisor that can speak with the guy and, in some way addresses, is compliant, and in a second step to go to the rector. Anyway, the Code of Ethics of the University of Trento deals with this kind of stuff. Maybe we have to think about it and maybe to modify the codes in order to improve research integrity, but this could be the topic of a second workshop on that. I will stop here and I will open the floor to the debate. So I think that we have had a lot of food for thought, answers, questions, issues, and so the floor is open. Why don't you speak at the microphone, because everything is recorded. You can state your name.
Okay. Ilaria Ampollini. I'm a postdoc at the Department of Sociology here in Trento. Just two answers to the questions posed by Cinzia Picciocchi, because we worked for the Pre-Integral project here as University of Trento. It was me with it was Professor Massimiliano Bucchi with me. And so we have organized 4 focus groups trying to answer these kind of questions. So it was clear from these focus groups with young researchers, seniors, and dean of departments that firstly, research integrity has many different meanings in different fields. So one of the main obstacles is to find a definition suitable for all the fields, because every researcher involved in the focus group had a different idea of what integrity is, of what a good research is. So to answer your question, the problem is different and definitions are different. And the other thing about competition, you said that research integrity is a matter of individual responsibility. Yes, yeah, exactly. Is individual responsibility, but then there's the framework, the collective dimension. And one of the things emerged from these focus groups, particularly from the focus group with young researchers, was that competition and environment usually push them to commit not misconduct but questionable research practices. And so the problem is a problem of context, of academic culture. So if you work in a healthy environment. In a healthy research group, probably you won't have any problem with this kind of issue, but it strongly depends on your PI, on your supervisor, and on your environment.
I was thinking also of the sharing of data and the sharing and the transparency, because on the one hand we want to share. To me, I'm a lawyer, I can share whatever you want. I'm not I don't have to reach a result or an outcome before you. But if I would be, I don't know, a biologist or a physicist, I think it's different.
Yeah, absolutely. There was another thing, but now I forgot, so maybe later. Oh yeah, sorry. The lack of training is, I think, the main problem of our University of Trento. We don't have, well, in Italy in general, actually, we don't have any training, both for young researchers, senior researchers. So many researchers who joined our focus group did not even know that we have a code, ethics code, and that we have rules to follow in order to pursue research integrity. So.
Amorietta Massidda from Cibio, professor of microbiologist and also delegate for research integrity here at the University of Trento for Cibio. I had already the possibility to discuss with the speaker, to congratulate with them for the very interesting topics. Most during the break, most because they not only talk about research integrity, rules on research integrity, but also also on the problems that are related to research integrity. So I would like now to share also with the rest of the group some of the facts, and also ask you some question on what we can do to, let's say, solve these big problems and making science more solid, more open, more curiosity-driven than it is right now. As a scientist, I share all my worries and perplexity which were given in the introduction of today, because I feel we are overloaded by bureaucracy, and not often we get something back from this bureaucracy that is increasing. Then I found also there is a really huge penalization over the years, especially in Italy. I don't know if in other countries it's like that, on scientific versus humanistic topics regarding research integrity, of course, because it's easier, but also safety rules, and also the way we are judged for production, our production, because we are strict to buy bibliometric numbers, while humanistic are obviously not. And the third point is if we would need to give first, if we have to give upstream this research integrity code also to the national founding agency, like the governmental agency, which in my opinion do not act with the transparency that would be required. So that's the first question. The second question is as a reviewer of a scientific journal, but simply as a reader, I see a lot of unacceptable practices that are increased during the years. Who's gonna take care of this? If I write to the editor complaining about a colleague that doesn't cite properly, or you don't get satisfaction. So how is the way to solve this?
I was wondering about the possibility to think of forms of training done also in at a distance. That means I was thinking of the HIPAA codes in the States. That is like to say a step required to all the researchers who are starting a research in scientific or behavioral and social sciences. So if we could think of improving this form of, I know it is not a real learning, it is not a direct learning, but maybe it can also improve new forms of training for the researchers and new forms of culture too. So that means to have like an introduction to the main condition of the research, and this could become, like to say, a necessary, a mandatory step to consider before starting a formal research. So maybe it is just an idea, but I think also in some of the committees we are working with the protection of animals used for researches. There is this matter of train researchers, and that works much more if we think of involving human beings and data and healthcare data. So maybe we can think of creating something like a training online in order to improve the awareness and some very basic competencies. Thank you.
I have a question as well. Can you hear? Yeah. So my name is Vittorio Iacovella. I'm the data technician in the Think Open at CIMEC initiative, the Center for Mind and Brain Sciences, here at the University of Trento, of course. So my question, as far as I'm really interested in like building a library of data set coming from the neuroscience research at CIMEC, my question would be whether there could exist data misuses which are kind of compliant with integrity. So something which integrity cannot cover, but is still like kind of bad. Even if I think like that kind of cultural heritage point, I think it's really interesting. But when you expose your data to the rest of the world, then something bad can happen. And my point would be whether there could be a way to control for this, because I'm really scared about like exposing data sets which are like prone to bad use, like data from our brain, or let's say the way in which humans think. And I don't know if you can think about a way of controlling the misuse, or whether integrity is not going to cover all the possible cases. And I would just add one point. I think many people are talking about training. I think that, for example, for the next generation of scientists, for example, PhD students or graduate or like master students as well, I think at least in, for example, hard science field, training people to use practical tools like software, or just, let's say, the semantic way to arrange their data and so on and so forth, which relate, for example, with the FAIR principle. It's an interesting and a good way to train next generation of scientists to be ready for this kind of integrity and open environments. Thanks.
I don't know whether I don't pretend to have answer. I would like to ask myself some questions. Having heard now your question and looking back for what we have said, I wonder whether in fact the problem is to see whether the problem is integrity for the definition, because I think that integrity is at the end very well defined. in the sense that all definitions agree on all the points. I think that the problem is to be whether in fact the fact of defining something make things clearer or confound things, because if you say that like the same of being, you should be honest in your life. If you ask honest to a banker, you say that I am very honest, I make a profit for my bank. And in that sense, it says that all those who are not in that sense, somebody says that I is a CEO, I am honest because legally I must be paid 400 times more than my worker, because that's part of the game. I think that it would be interesting to see whether in fact the question should be on the other two words. One is science. I think that science, as we have said, not only is a very broad spectrum of interest, but in fact the criteria for declaring something, say, scientific is so different, not only for human science. If you have a research in, say, philology on something like that, is totally different from the fact of doing research on, say, microbiology or whatever, because your goal is, and that is very important to see whether in fact then research in different fields could be applied in the same way. So I wonder whether, and that's the question, don't you think that would be interesting to see practically, even here in Trento, if you take a sample, or broadly also in research grants in Italy, in Europe, and to say, to compare the criteria of, say, integrity from the point of view of the contents of your request, because integrity, from what we have said, at the end coincide with integrity in procedures, never in contents. And that is clearly very important if you have to look for comparative evaluation in different sciences. I was mentioning before, say, psychology, simply because I am another, but sociology. Experiment in sociology, what are the criteria for saying that it is integral? There could be a kind of, say, ideological bias, and certainly, as you say, that if you include ideology, is that a conflict of interest from the point of view of the classical conflict of interest, or is it in fact something which allows you to go for research in something which is in fact looking for another purpose? I was mentioning before all the research which is done in the use of social media by young people. What is the purpose of doing research in that? We had recently a research proposal for looking whether in fact training of elderly people in social media use is an advantage or a disadvantage. Let's say but that depends on your personal point of view. Certainly, but that would be declared, and in that sense, science, we reconcile a bit that science should be something which declares what are your endpoints and why you are looking for that. Is training of elderly people in use of social media to decrease the sense of solitude, or to make them more capable of living alone without relationship with the others, because social media substitute the relationship with persons. So I wonder whether it would be interesting to have some kind of field evaluation of criteria of evaluating integrity from the point of view in different science and different time, and in looking in the different definition of research, because again, we are using those names as if they could be homogeneous in their interpretation, which is not. So the accent should be, and I agree, I think that it's difficult to go beyond the integrity definition that you are made. The problem is to test the applicability of those criteria in different fields and in different research, something which is approved, not approved, and whether in fact the problem has to do with integrity, because now, for instance, take the New England Journal of Medicine, the Bible, or those who are published in New England, they have a very high impact factor, so they are credible, that's it. If you see the conflicts of interest, they are so big now that they don't publish them. They say, if you like to have the list of conflicts of interest, you have to look another site because it's too long to publish those conflicts of interest. And that is a declaration and said, I declare that I am biased. And therefore your research is transparent, or in fact using the declaration of conflicts of interest as a substitute for absence of conflicts of interest. And that is true for some area of research, but could be completely different. Somebody who is working archaeology is different from, and archaeology is a bit like the genetic of, say, history. And those who are working in genetics, they have to declare the conflict of interest against which? Because nobody could support a genetic test without the support of the industry, except very few NIH or something like that, and then you have to go to the... So I think that would be very important to agree on the fact that integrity is well defined. Those definitions must be tested at local level, national level, in different fields of research. Otherwise, we say that biomedicine is the classical area where those things are used. Even in microbiology could be completely different with respect to what is done in another area for, say, genetics in medicine, and even more in other science. But with respect to accountability to the society, science and research are in fact declaring by themselves that they have a respected status because they are looking for the well, or for the good of society. You were mentioning that states trust science. Who believes that? Nobody. Say, most of the research which is done on big data is practically supported by the military funds. By definition, because they have to know before anybody else, and they are doing that. So I think that will be a big challenge, really, especially for those who are working in a faculty of law, to really, because law has been developing through different conflicts with society in order to establish rules, and today the application of ethical or normative principles of law must be really confronted with that. Certainly, at the end, all these issues about ethical committee have been generated by bad side effects, thalidomide, or those sort of things, where offices were created, focus on that. Now these things are more or less established. Recently, one of the experts for safety evaluation in France, who is now a retired professor, very respected, he has published an article saying the two deaths of safety surveillance. Because safety surveillance has become a part of the statistics, not of the content. If a side effect is rare enough and is compared with declared benefit. And in that sense, surveillance say that drug could be kept in the market. A drug which has been used for years for epilepsy, valproate, has been discovered by patients. A mother was set up a network of mothers who have de fact produced at least as many malformations as thalidomide, not so severe. And recently, after years, the European Union said yes, and then we put a warning on that drug because so the situation becomes confused, and all those who have published state or private group on safety of valproate were accountable. They were published in referees journals. They were the information to patient was approved by government, but is not a critique. It's just to declare. And I think that the observation that the challenge of being accountable by scientific society must be updated permanently with the evolution of what are the other definitions, because integrity could remain the same, like the same. Do not kill is a principle, and it stays there. Now, you could make so many deaths without killing directly and be accountable for the death of that person. Those who are killing migrants are not accountable to anybody because they are systemic crimes. Migration is forbidden, and those who are falling in that trap, nobody is accountable. So I think that we are facing changing of concept, and I think that would be interesting to make some advance. I think that would be, I would be very much in favor of testing that. You have prepared that in 2017. Try to test that in a sample of research for the European Union, since you are independent and they have not to be interfering, and to see whether in fact the procedural respect of integrity definition coincide with the substantial respect of, say, innovation or declaration of benefit or something like that, and make that not simply on medicine but something like that. And to do that in a local situation in Trento by your group Integra. I think that is very interesting to have a group who is taking the responsibility of something which is happening here, because also the culture, and you have here, we have discussed also something, you have obviously interest in Trento, as in everywhere, which must be respected because they have a justification. Say, economic development implies that you have some interest in developing capacity of production in Trento for informatics, something like that. And that will be good, not to, again, criticize or exclude, but to make the society accountable for that, because integrity has to do, in fact, with the identity of research to make trust in research. And that is something which could be very interesting in also local level.
Thank you. Yes, I would start with the responsibility of political decision makers in the sentences. What the way, because nowadays it spreads through Europe in the sentences. All the governments then, when they finance the universities, sort of budget funding and all that depends on their thinking of how to assess public spending and do the universities produce the type of results they want, and somehow they have missed this integrity discussion discussion, I think. The new public management ideology that is very much questioned. In other words, that you have to measure the performance of researchers, the performance of the performance of a university, and then the funding formula used for funding university, all these different criteria. And of course, I mean, researchers are dependent on funding, so they do what they're asked to do. And I think this is coming to the fore now. This issue will be dealt with because there's so many protests from different sides. I think it was attributed to Einstein, I don't know who originally said that, but it basically runs like this, that everything you can count does not count, and what counts everything that counts cannot be counted. And there's something wrong with the current counting system there. But if you then go back to... So I would like to see that also that there is this type of integrity discussion at this highest level. And of course EU is a major driver there. And because it also, all these principles that have not been really pronounced, but why is the system like it is now? I don't know who decides. Again, some people say it goes back to Thatcher and all these research evaluations. Then those who evaluate adopt these ideologies. So this is what we need to fund. We need to fund the research who published most. Or of course, there are rebellious assessors as well, and they take a different picture. But if you look at the principles in the Alea Code, and as I said, it's one way of dividing up the continuum. But if you think of them as sort of as an individual level, reliable, honest, respects other people, is accountable. That means somebody's a nice person, a likable person. And if you put your researcher hat on, and say, you ask this question, what does it mean in my case? And then you ask the question, which field are you working in? But these principles apply. And of course there's the natural sciences or the hard sciences, medicine and biomedicine and all, or now artificial intelligence for sure, are very important fields in the sense because you have to regulate them. So and as they can use drug use, for example. I mean, it's the consequences can be really harmful, and so they come to the fore. But it's the same thing in social sciences and humanities in a sense. I mean, so you have to ask yourself, what does it mean if I work in linguistics? Linguistics I'm a linguist by background. I said, if I study, for example, spoken language, or if I study the rhetoric of email, the chains and things like that, or social media for that matter. There are also ethical issues there. First of all, am I allowed to use these data sources? And just to take a simple example, or if I try to push an opinion and use selective data, or if I base my claim that I have data but don't really have any data. And the issues in social sciences and humanities are very often fuzzier, but they're similar issues. So I think it's a very good idea within an institution to say, these are the principles. What does it mean for you? What does it mean in your field? What is important? And then to make this distinction between the fact that, of course, all fields develop. There are new tools, there are new opinions, new ideas. If you think social sciences, law, of what is what is right, what is wrong, are we all equal, and who is entitled to health care, and can we afford the welfare society? This is a big Nordic issue these days, and of course the population says yes. But the solutions don't support that, because they say we need to cut public spending, and all these issues, they come to the question of what is research integrity in my field, what can I say, and this, so that's so the implementation, I think, is in the training part, because I think training in research integrity is very important, but it has to be, in a certain sense, hands-on training. I mean, there are the general rules, regulations, programs, and then you ask, okay, if I do this, is this proper behavior? Can I do this? And then you have your supervisors, you have the seniors, you can ask what they think of it. But they might have different ideas because they've been brought up in an environment that is used to what will come up in the unacceptable practices, what's not agreed on. So when setting up the research culture of an institution, I think these are very important issues. Discussing what does it mean in reality? How can we implement this in our case? But at the framework level, and in general, you can only give the general principles and say this means that this is good and that is bad. That's why most of these codes of conduct start with good behavior. They don't start with a punishment. They try to avoid them. I would say research integrity is like, the aim is the same as with the dentist. They don't want to find cavities. They try to educate you and make you brush your teeth regularly and not eat sweets. But still, cavities occur. And that's what we aim to make sure that we have no cases. But, well, that's not the case yet. So, therefore, I think it's also at the institutional level, it's a good idea to have somebody you can go to who's well versed in this thinking and ask, is there something wrong with this picture? Am I, when I suspect my colleague or their methods, or is this a question of opinion? Is it like schools of thought? Is it like a scientific issue? Is this intentional, or is this misleading, or is this wrong? And then, and if you can do this in confidence, because normally you do this with your colleagues or with but it would be good to have an advisor there. Germany, they have these ombudsmen. They have different, and in the States they have these RIOs, research integrity officers, but they have their mandate is usually they are also involved in the investigation, but to have somebody you can go to and talk in confidence, like the institution mom. I'm not saying that mothers would be the best advisors, but so, and it's a good starting point. I think these debates and discussion of individual cases or practices and making a distinction of what's part of the scientific or scholarly debate and are you allowed to make mistakes? Are they genuine mistakes, or are they intentional mistakes when you want to mislead the public by manipulating the results to support your hypothesis, things like that. So that would be my my suggestion that when building up a system, think of it as an issue of research culture that all can agree on. what makes you a nice person as a person who can be trusted in at your institution. That was the other thing I picked up from. Yeah, yes, it was about data and data, open science and open data. That is really a huge issue at the moment, and I don't think that anybody has the answers. I mean, we're talking about these huge data sources that can be misused, or then the sort of project-based data. Who owns that data? What sort of agreements should there be within a project, for example? Who is entitled to the use of data during the project? If it's collection of the results of individual researchers or partners, and who can reuse the data? So I think there's a lot of need for that sort of talk in projects. What are our principles about publishing our results? So have these agreements, preferably written agreements, because the spoken ones tend to be forgotten or have memorized differently when problems occur. So what are the principles we agree to follow? And then it was very interesting in that if we think of the future, I mean, the expectation is that open data and data sources are extremely valuable, and they will solve all sorts of problems in different fields. But for a representative of Elsevier said that Elsevier doesn't really consider itself any longer as a publisher so much, but as a provider of data analysis, a data repository. So their big picture in the world is to provide data repositories and their analysis systems, and so that you can buy that data from them. So that's where they see the growth. So that the importance of data. I don't know whether that is true, but probably is. So then we have a new monopoly, and we'll buy back our resets. There was something else I wanted to say. Yes, and then open access in general. I think and open science. There's so many issues and the principles of how things should be done and what the ethical consequences might be, but there are very few codes of conduct in that sense, and artificial intelligence is one of the, I think, most urgent ones in a certain sense, because very often you develop the field, and you think that whatever is technically possible, and you don't think, is this ethical? Is it ethical to do that? And the ethics comes afterwards. But I think it's very, very important with artificial intelligence to develop the ethical regulations or rules simultaneously. Otherwise, we get to this system where we're all monitored by robots. So it's becoming more and more important to react quickly, and that's the matter of the ethical committees. I mean, it can't take 30 years. The problem, of course, with all these rules is that, or codes, is that they have to be fairly pragmatic, and you can't agree on all the theoretical issues. So agree on what you can agree and start with that type of stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. We are at the end of this first part of the meeting, because after that there will be the premiazione per le tesi di bioetica, di biodiritto. But before that, I cannot give you, and I will not give you any concluding remarks, but I would like to give you a list of words you know, there is in some websites, there are usually on your right a list of words. They are bigger, they are little. I mean, the most frequent or the most used word. So I will give you my personal list of the, I don't know if they are the most important words, but a few words dealing with this research integrity. Okay. For instance, uniformity in principles, but difference in standards. These words are sometimes in combination, sometimes in opposition. Trust, another very important word, trust, linked with self-regulation, but monitored self-regulation versus binding law. Again, linked with trust, I see another word which is unacceptable. I mean, we have to take research integrity seriously, and so we have to consider some practices unacceptable. Then, responsibility and accountability, and they are linked with transparency, and I just mentioned the word NNT, a word that I don't know how many people knows this NNT acronym, the number needed to treat, which is the number of patients that need to be treated in order to have an impact on one single person. So if you Google NNT linked with the number of drugs, you will see some very, very, very surprising data. So NNT, the number needed to treat, is another word I would like to sum up in this very personal list. Quality. And quality has to include research integrity. Another word, needs. Met needs and unmet needs. Another word is training, but also training the trainees. Another word is human rights in a post-human world, or even, and I'm thinking also about artificial intelligence, in a post-human research. Again, red tape, bureaucracy, red tape versus promotion of research integrity. At the ethics committee, usually, sometimes are perceived as just red tape, bureaucracy. And as member of ethics committee, we had to promote the ethics evaluation as a way to promote quality, not to put obstacle to research. Public money, business, and also public money, and the accountability that comes with the use of public money. Safeguards, general principles is not enough. I mean, we can have the best list of general principles, but if we do not have ways, procedure, safeguards to implement them, principles are not enough. And the last one, conflict of interests. Rationing. Nobody use, I think, commodification, but I mean this could be another word linked with conflict of interest. So, sorry for this very chaotic, list of words, and but just to outline that there is always a simple answer for difficult question, but usually it is the wrong one. So we have to work on uncertainty, we have to work on, and a lot of job have to be done here in the University of Trento to give an efficient and effective answer for this difficult question. And we have a lot of job to do, and Integra has to have a lot of job to do in combination with the ethics committee here and in other places. So I will stop here. Thank you, thanking very much our distinguished speakers, and let me also thank Francesca Tomasi, that is responsible for the main organization, and let me also to thank Luisa Saviori, which has been supporting and promoting research in this university since many years. So thank you very much, Luisa. Ok, adesso direi possiamo passare alla premiazione delle migliori tesi di bioetica e biodiritto. Noi ancora prendiamo la disponibilità di Gianni Tognoni e di Crista Varantola, perché voi sarete chi you are going to award the winner of this part, and so okay, maybe we can stand up. Bene, allora sono presenti tutte e tre, due che sono quindi chi c'è? Irene Domenici, Francesca Bertuccio c'è e c'è Sara Battistello. Ok, allora abbiamo proprio un po' di tempo, ma insomma è giusto dedicare un attimo anche alle persone che hanno fatto la loro tesi in bioetica o biodiritto e che hanno fatto una tesi talmente buona da essere premiata tra le migliori di questa università. Quest'anno abbiamo avuto due primi premi Seco e quindi il terzo premio, e partirei da Sara Battistello, se vuole dire, che ha avuto appunto il terzo premio. La tesi è stata su nuovi modelli di responsabilità del medico verso una medicina personalizzata. Fatemi dire rapidamente la motivazione che la giuria ha adottato per questo premio. Quindi il tema sono i nuovi modelli di responsabilità del medico. Gli argomenti trattati dalla candidata toccano un nervo scoperto per i professionisti della salute. L'iter storico, dottrinale, legislativo e giuridico della responsabilità medica è stato trattato con un linguaggio tecnico appropriato. Dopo una descrizione lineare, chiara ed essenziale, la tesi analizza in modo esaustivo i punti di forza e di debolezza dei provvedimenti legislativi più recenti in tema di responsabilità medica. È ricca di riferimenti dottrinali e giurisprudenziali. L'autrice descrive lo stato dell'arte della medicina personalizzata e traccia anche alcune ipotesi realistiche relative al mutamento in termini di responsabilità in un futuro che è già presente. Quindi molte congratulazioni e la professoressa Varantola ha l'onore di premiarla. No, deve dire qualcosa, o sulla sua tesi, sul perché ha fatto una tesi di questo genere, cosa le ha dato, cosa c'è da migliorare, insomma proprio se vuole dire qualcosa al riguardo.
Intanto ringrazio tutti quanti e vorrei ringraziare la professoressa Picciocchi in particolare perché ho un legame profondo, ha permesso di laurearmi in un momento di difficoltà, forse quindi riconosco l'integrità scientifica e umana della professoressa e ci tengo molto. Ho voluto approfondire questo argomento perché sono rimasta affascinata fin dall'inizio nel mio percorso universitario dalle tematiche di biodiritto, anche perché integrano più aspetti. Appunto è difficile capire cos'è l'integrità se ci si focalizza solamente sul dato giuridico, se si dà una risposta semplice che può essere il settore della responsabilità civile e quindi quella penale. E invece avevo del tempo per lo sviluppo della mia tesi per comprendere come più ambiti potessero intersecarsi, quindi la storia anche umana del rapporto tra il medico e il paziente e quindi la giurisprudenza che influenza ha avuto e viceversa. E ho capito che non c'è una causa-effetto, ma è proprio un'influenza, quindi forse non c'è un dato che viene prima e uno che viene dopo, ma si intersecano e le domande sono moltissime, sono aperte e insomma mi ha appassionato. Grazie. Sto facendo la pratica che vorrei specializzarmi nell'avvocatura per i minori, quindi per la tutela minorile. Speriamo. Grazie.
Bene, allora arriviamo ai 2 premi ex aequo. Parlo prima della tesi di Francesca Vertuccio che non può esserci. Era una tesi dedicata all'eutanasia minorile e una sintesi della motivazione è: la tesi ricostruisce in modo approfondito e con appropriata schematizzazione il panorama normativo attraverso il quale sono stati affrontati i complessi e delicati problemi del fine vita. Dà conto della ricca discussione a cui una serie di ordinamenti normativi hanno dato origine sul piano teorico e dottrinale. Di particolare interesse la scelta di far emergere il profilo delle diverse posizioni a partire dalla questione, per molti aspetti, limite dell'eutanasia minorile. Manderemo poi il riconoscimento. E arriviamo appunto all'altra alla miglior tesi ex aequo, la tesi di Irene Domenici. Prego. Un tema anche, come vedete, medicina personalizzata, eutanasia minorile. Un altro tema certamente attuale è quello dell'obiezione di coscienza. Il titolo della tesi è Sostenibilità dell'obiezione di coscienza nello Stato costituzionale di diritto e la motivazione per il primo premio è la seguente. L'autrice affronta l'argomento con lucidità, rigore e completezza. La tesi fornisce un contributo importante e aggiornato rispetto tanto alle radici storiche del fenomeno quanto alle modalità con cui è stato affrontato. La trattazione cerca un paradigma di riferimento per una regolamentazione dell'obiezione di coscienza che evidenzia se e quali elementi costituzionali debbano essere posti a garanzia di questo istituto e dei suoi necessari limiti. Il lavoro della candidata risulta originale proprio nell'aver cercato di impostare un modello inclusivo e sostenibile attraverso il quale si prospetta la soluzione all'apparente antinomia tra dovere di obbedienza da una parte e obiezione di coscienza in termini di reciproca coesistenza. Congratulazioni e il professor Gianni Tognoni la può. Complimenti.
Allora, perché ho scelto di affrontare questo tema, un tema che mi ha sempre affascinato e ha molto a che fare con come la sfera intima di ognuno di noi può arrivare a dimostrarsi nel pubblico e soprattutto nel rapporto con un'altra persona che nel caso dell'obiezione di coscienza medica è un paziente, quindi come la sfera intima del medico può arrivare a influire sul rapporto col paziente, che limiti questa influenza deve avere, che diritti al medico e che diritti al paziente. Questo mi ha sempre interessato. Poi io nella tesi ho cercato di affrontare tutti i conflitti di coscienza, o quelli che a me sembravano più interessanti per sviluppare questo modello, quindi sono partita dall'obiezione di coscienza al servizio militare fino ad arrivare all'obiezione di coscienza a celebrare matrimoni omosessuali. Quindi insomma ho cercato di ampliare il più possibile, ma il focus principale era sul rapporto tra medico e paziente. La sfera del diritto della salute è quella che mi ha sempre interessato di più, infatti anche adesso sto scrivendo il mio dottorato su questo tema e ancora su temi che hanno a che vedere con l'etica e con il rilievo che l'etica può avere sulla sfera pubblica, quindi spero di continuare in questo campo. E ringrazio il professor Casonato che mi è stato dietro per tutto il tempo, volevo andare all'estero, mi ha detto va bene, andiamoti all'estero, mi ha fatto fare tutto quello che mi serviva per completare la ricerca e sono veramente grata. Grazie.
Complimenti, e direi che con questo abbiamo terminato la giornata di oggi. E grazie appunto a Francesca Tomasi, a Luisa Saviore, a Cinzia Picciocchi, a Gianni Tognoni, a Crista Varantola. Forse è una minaccia, non lo so, ma questa è solo la prima occasione in cui l'Ateneo ha cercato e sempre più cercherà di approfondire il tema dell'integrità della ricerca, perché proprio come abbiamo detto un'eccellenza della ricerca, una qualità della ricerca non può essere solo di carattere scientifico inteso in termini restrittivi, ma deve aprirsi evidentemente anche alle tematiche dell'etica, dell'integrità. Thank you so much for everybody, and I'll see you the next time. Okay.